One day in the world of hell and its demons, Balrog, the most powerful demon, bowed before the Demon King at the infernal castle, asking why he was desperate to return to his world even after possessing the entire host of hell. This fearsome Demon King was just an ugly human with misplaced priorities named Kangwoo, and in a bid to please him, his subordinates served him Squidward's head on a platter. However, Kangwoo was disgusted by the morons because their only concept of food was devouring their opponents' bodies, so he wanted to return to reading comics, Cosmo mags, and steamy novels. Later, a lady named Lilith yelled at him for taking her love for granted. He almost puked when the succubus queen offered to do the slippery-sloppery thing with him that night, and Kangwoo commanded her to get off him, but the disgusting creature forced her tentacles down his orifices. After ensuring that ugly hoe for centuries, Kangwoo knew he had to return to Earth, so he finalized his decision and told Balrog to get everything set. Balrog ordered the other demons to call the Black Sorcerer Ammon, and the returning ritual began with Kangwoo's body releasing magic, which eventually forced the gates open. But just before stepping in, he heard Lilith and Balrog sniffling and told them not to cry. Lilith even offered to follow him, but Kangwoo was so horrified that he immediately escaped through the gate and gave her the middle finger, wishing they would never meet again. He finally arrived at the last exit point, but a nuclear crack was detected, so Kangwoo prevented it from completely shutting down with his hand, and much later, he found himself on Earth. The status window displayed that his feature, the power of gluttony, was sealed, and unfortunately for him, some uglier-than-heck goblins started chasing after him. He tried using magic to defeat them, but it didn't work because magic was obviously weaker on Earth, so instead, he created blade-like wings on his body and sliced the goblins, leveling up until he had defeated them all. Later, he was interrupted by a loud scream, which didn't sound like it belonged to a monster or demon, but rather a human, so he used an ability named the Power of Speed and ran to track the voice. On his way, he couldn't get over how fed up he was with seeing monsters that had tentacles all over, and as he remembered the succubus queen who was so hideous that he'd rather remain a virgin, he ran even faster than before. Eventually, he found a horde of goblins surrounding a girl, who was visibly terrified, so Kangwoo got rid of the monsters and the girl thanked him. Merely touching her hand made him blast his sack for the first time in 10,000 years. So after she introduced herself as Han Ciala, Kangwoo immediately proposed to her. Ciala was visibly shocked, so Kangwoo told her he was just joking and introduced himself to her while asking about her injuries. The girl said it was nothing serious, but she soon passed out and her smartphone fell out. That was more than enough for him to realize that he was on Earth, so he told her not to stress herself while he performed simple first aid on her. He realized that he could also easily communicate with her, thanks to his regular practice of the Korean language, as he had forced his subordinate in hell to speak only in Korean. Ciala thanked him for looking after her, and he gave her the smartphone, but noticed that it was 2023, meaning it had only been 5 years since he fell to hell from Earth. Certainly, this called for more information, so he asked Ciala why she was in that sort of place, and she said she was going on a solo gate hunt after awakening as a god player. The term sounded familiar to him, so he asked what level she was at, and she said she was at a level 6 and even wondered why a player as powerful as himself was at an E-ranked gate. However, he felt his own level was a lot lower than hers, but he simply replied that he was also in a bit of a situation. Accidentally, his shoulder touched her, and she turned pink all over and immediately stood up, saying they should get going already. He insisted on supporting her, though, but the girl was looking more like a tomato with every single stroke of his finger. However, Kangwoo told her not to refuse his help, and that he would escort her to her destination if only she would point him in the right direction. The whole conversation felt wholesome because it had been the first with a human in so many years, and he was also glad she didn't seem suspicious of his identity, so he had a high chance of easily adjusting to human society. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of the gate, and things got clearer to Kangwoo as he realized that they were precisely on Earth, given that there were such gates, causing space rifts. He stepped in through them and found himself in a human society where obviously there were no tentacles. His heart was brimming with joy, and he was so glad to be back on Earth that he broke down crying in the middle of nowhere, and Ciala felt a bit bad for him, so she invited him over for dinner at her place, where she would be the main meal. Ciala was suddenly looking like an angel, descending with spring flowers, but right as he was about to accept her invitation, someone called out to them and asked them to present their player cards. Ciala reached for hers, But because Kangwoo had nothing to show, he simply resorted to using his hypnotic abilities by activating Dantalion's power of oblivion. And even though it was a middle finger he presented to the poor guy, it worked. Much later, he arrived at Ciala's house and had to appreciate every single bit of his journey there, from the smell of an old apartment to a narrow stairway, the cold railings, dusty old windows, and most importantly, the fact that he was going to get some action after 10,000 years. However, what seemed like the beginning of a bright future and unlimited, exploding sessions was almost a nightmare when he found out that Ciala was living with her mom. Kangwoo soon started questioning his entire life and Ciala's intentions behind inviting him for a meal, because he still thought she was the main meal. But how could he eat when her mom was very much in the picture? Ciala introduced him to her mom and said he rescued her earlier, and the kind old lady thanked him for rescuing her daughter and warmly invited him to eat with them. Even though Kangwoo wished it was just him and his baddie, his life in hell was certainly a million times worse, so it was something to be thankful for. Just then, he realized that he needed a cell phone to gather as much information as he could about Earth, so he asked if he could borrow Ciala's phone for a minute, and she generously lent it to him. Kangwoo almost had another explosion from scrolling on a phone because he had missed this feeling for a minute. Since it had been 5 years since he went to hell, he started looking up news articles from 2018 and learned that there was a day of cataclysm when the entire world turned upside down. On this day, monsters appeared from hundreds of gates that appeared from the blue, and firearms were absolutely useless in battling those monsters until a world organization was formed, and the first player appeared from America, leading to a spike in the number of players worldwide, who were known as the hope of humanity. However, it just occurred to Kangwoo that the day of cataclysm was the exact day he fell into hell, meaning he was in one of the simultaneous opening gates. He decided not to rely heavily on the articles, but he still interrupted when the meal was served, and he found that it was his beloved kimchi that he had been craving for millennia. It was time for everyone to eat, but Kangwoo couldn't just eat like a normal person because every single bite of his meal meant the world to him. He remembered that when he fell into the depths of hell out of nowhere and accepted demonic energy to survive there until he was almost completely transformed into a demon. But because of his humanity, his taste buds and appetite could never be satisfied with anything he ate in hell. Even the top-ranking demons he had devoured to survive tasted like garbage, and everything was just making him lose his sanity because there was no break, and he was leaving a stupid cycle. During this period, the only thing that kept him going all those years was his one single desire to return to us, so it was a really beautiful moment for him, and he cried tears of joy because he was glad to return to Earth. He thanked them from the depths of his heart and told them their food was so delicious. But Ciala said she was the one who should have been thankful and was sorry that she had nothing else to serve him. However, he even asked for another bowl of rice, and he devoured that almost immediately, but his man versus food session was interrupted when some rascal broke down the door, calling out for Ciala. The blonde guy asked Ciala who gave her permission to enter the gate as she pleased, but she looked at him defiantly and told him to get out. It seemed his ears were on a break, so she repeated herself. Her mom tried restraining her as she confronted Taehyun, asking who gave him the right to visit the house and warning him not to come near her because she was now a full-fledged player. The idiot mocked her and laughed out loud, but then he punched a wall and asked her how a low-level player like herself could claim to be a player. She warned him not to draw any nearer, and obviously, fear was written on his mother's face as she watched her aggressive son draw nearer to them. The boy said they not only had a father who died early, but a mother who earned only peanuts. However, Ciala blamed him for putting the family in that situation, and he dragged her out, demanding that she follow him to Andra's guild. Ciala protested, saying she was never going to such a trash guild with him, but he said he would get her into a good party. However, Ciala remained defiant, so she bit him on his wrist until he bled out, and he slapped her to the ground in retaliation. Her mum screamed her name out, and her brother said there was no way Ciala could survive in the world by being a nice girl, and she should simply accompany him and serve as his offering. However, since she claimed to be a full-fledged player, he said they should just fight it out anyway. His poor mom begged on her knees, saying she would do better and he shouldn't hurt Ciala, but he pushed her away and told her to get the heck out because she was pissing him off. Ciala watched as her mom fell to the ground and crawled to pick her up, but her stupid brother kept mocking both of them. And when she glared at him with the craziest death stare known to man, he called her a low-level player. Obviously, he was a stage 2 meta-human, and Ciala could never be a match for him because he felt she was a fool who was only good for her pretty face. In fact, it was only if she got into the Andra's guild that his superior there would have a better impression of him. In the midst of his drama, he noticed Kangwoo was completely engrossed in his meal. So Tae-hun wondered when his mom and sister started running a charity organization for grown men living with their girlfriends' moms. He confronted Kangwoo, but got no response because the guy was just enjoying his first good meal in a while. But the idiots got upset and kicked everything off the table, including the food and the table itself. Finally, he had gotten Kangwoo's complete attention, and the guy was initially in shock until he transitioned to grief and anguish as he cried for his kimchi stew. Tae-hun asked his sister where she found a beggar like Kangwoo from, and while he was still crying, he kicked him and said he should stop being a loser and get the heck up. However, that was the worst mistake he would ever make in his miserable life, because Kangwoo was absolutely furious at the idiot's audacity to spill his kimchi stew and was about to crash out like the demon he was. That good-for-nothing still didn't get the picture and was even gritting his teeth in annoyance and activating whatever pathetic power he had left in him so he could convince himself that he didn't just look into the eyes of a demon. However, some force interrupted his power display, and that belonged to none other than his sister, who was creating a way out for Kangwoo. What she didn't realize was that the harmless-looking guy actually had the upper hand and was aiming for her dimwit brother in full force. Tae-hun was even too slow for Kangwoo, so all his moves were predictable, and Kangwoo simply had to block his movements before they got to him. But after missing the first hit, Tae-hun was upset and tried his best to land another blow, but Kangwoo was using his feet to the best of his ability and had even caused the idiot to start bleeding. However, Tae-hun held King's legs to prevent him from moving, but he simply wiggled his way out of that situation and dealt him another blow to the face. By then, both guys had been briefly separated from each other, and Tae-hun's face was looking like a Botox filling gone wrong. But Kangwoo wasn't even done with him yet, and started delivering another set of punches to him, so Tae-hun tried his very best to at least land one on Kangwoo. Unfortunately, he wasn't as good as he thought, and Kangwoo kept deceiving him with his pattern of attack up until the point where he was on all fours, trying to catch his breath as he wondered just who exactly Kangwoo was. Eventually, Kangwoo was visibly the one with the upper hand, and had his foot pressing against Tae-hun's head because he wasn't done yet, since the guy was still a long way off from paying for the kimchi stew he spilled. However, Tae-hun couldn't wrap his finger around why anyone would be acting like a maniac for a bowl of kimchi stew, but the fact that he even belittled it made Kangwoo angrier than he previously was. So he fixed his dumb opponent's mouth by slamming his face into the ground repeatedly and punishing him to repeat that kimchi stew was sacred food. He had now turned Tae-hun into his plaything and murdered every form of pride or ego Tae-hun would ever have in his lifetime. When he even mistakenly didn't scream it loudly enough, he got more beatings until his face looked like a nice plushie, and his teeth looked like windows leading to hell. He eventually was forced to shout it at the top of his lungs, and the moral lesson of that fight was that no one should ever look down on kimchi stew again. When that whole episode came to an end, the house was cleaned up nicely, and Ciala attended to her mother by wrapping a band-aid around her head. As for her useless brother, he was cleaning the house and regretting ever meeting Kangwoo in his lifetime because now he looked like he had a stroke, not to mention that Kangwoo was even wearing his clothes. The guy couldn't believe that he suffered because of a simple meal, and it seemed Kangwoo was reading his thoughts, so he explained that normal daily activities of life shouldn't be taken for granted, down to sleeping and breathing calmly, because they were blessings, and it's obvious the idiot would never understand why. Kangwoo was teaching him to treat life preciously, but Tae-hun had to play along for his safety, even though he planned to report it to his boss. Anyway, Kangwoo asked him to come over when he was done with the dishes, and then he told him that he didn't find any merit in letting Tae-hun remain alive, because it's obvious he wasn't capable of doing any good for the world. While he wouldn't get murdered, Tae-hun would experience extreme levels of torture that would make him wish for death. Kangwoo activated the power of dread and had Tae-hun wrapped in his palm while he filled him with dread. This power would consume its target's soul and engrave a fear that no one could ever get rid of, while making such a person Kangwoo's personal slave. By the time Kangwoo was done with him, Tae-hun had wet his boxers and was dripping with urine, looking like a pathetic sight to his sister, who was glad to have someone like Kangwoo in her life. Anyway, Kangwoo had just realized that he was extremely broke, so he decided to look up ways to earn money, and found that he could achieve that by acquiring magic stones. He asked Ciala to show him what the stones looked like, and she showed him one she got from defeating a rank E-goblin. Apparently, higher-rank stones had darker colors, which is probably why Kangwoo couldn't feel any magic but was feeling something else entirely. Anyway, for that little thing he felt he gained 1 point of magic, but somehow he realized that what he felt was somewhat demonic energy. He had to collect some stones for now, but he would first start by searching for a player support center to avoid the whole drama concerning having a player card. Ciala offered to go with him because the house wasn't financially stable, and she needed some way to make more money. She thanked him again for coming through for her, and said she was going to learn the basics again so she would try to unlock her second awakening. Unfortunately, Kangwoo had no intention to help Ciala, not because he disliked her, but because his hunting efficiency would decrease if he kept traveling around with her, and he needed to ignore any single thing that could hinder his abilities and focus instead on regaining his power, just like he did in Hell. The next day, Kangwoo got an ID and was a little disappointed to find that no one had noticed his disappearance in the past 5 years. It hurt even more deeply that almost all his years, he seemed to have never had anyone in his corner, and even when he had gone through hell for what was 10,000 years, no one still looked for him. She interrupted his thoughts when she told him to look outside the window, where they appreciated a beautiful view of the city. They were at the player support center station and had gotten to the very large and impressive headquarters, which was even bigger than the city's airport. Ciala said she had something to give him and handed him an old phone belonging to her, with which he could have those long video calls where he'd ask her what she was wearing. They parted ways as Ciala went to register for the basic lecture, and he went on his own way. But before then, Ciala invited him for dinner, and he was more than glad to honor the invitation. Inside the play support center, Kangwoo couldn't get over how luxurious the building was, and understood that it was so because players were deemed very important. He came to a station where he was asked to insert his ID, and his identity was confirmed, after which he was given a waiting ticket. He headed to the testing room with the tickets, where some of the players discussed their results. One papa said he got a D rank while a younger guy encouraged him, saying he would get a B rank or higher on the second test. However, the older guy said he still wouldn't compare with the bigger players like Kangwoo-hyun or Yeonju, and in general, he couldn't compare to the big 5 guild masters who all had an S rank on their very first awakening. These big 5 guilds had legendary players whose names were irrelevant, but Kangwoo knew he would certainly run into these guys after recovering his full power, and that meant he had to do this sooner rather than later. After seeing his past powers were sealed, he knew that if he had used the trait of a player, he might even exceed his past self and strength. At that moment, he was next in line for the test, and after his identity was confirmed, he was asked to place a marble in his hand, which would change in color based on the strength of his power. The attendant also said that the color would be murkier depending on the rank of his power, but he feared that it might come out too strong, and he didn't want to get noticed too quickly. It seemed like his wish wouldn't be fulfilled, because the marble glowed brightly, almost as though he possessed a god level of power, and he had already started feeling himself when the attendant told him he was F rank and he could get his cursed hands off her marble. The lady went on to list a bunch of things he needed to know about his abilities, but Kangwoo was still too shocked by the discovery that he was an F rank. She said, even though he was an F rank, he would get an E rank player card and would be able to enter gates of such ranks, but he could only go into gates ranked higher with a guardian. Kangwoo knew this was too crazy, and someone like Balrog would lose his cool after hearing trash like that. Kangwoo himself suddenly felt his trauma for the past 10,000 years returning slowly, so he asked the attendant what he could do to increase his rank. The lady told him that if he participated in the basic training course, his rank would automatically be upgraded to a D level, and the other method would be to show the number of magic stones he had to transact, which would help increase his rank. He knew he'd certainly go for the second option and waited for his player card, and soon after he left, the attendant felt bad for him as she could see how traumatized he was. She was even thinking it would be better for him to give up on being a player since he was an F rank, but suddenly the color of the marble started changing, and before her very eyes, it had completely become pitch black and exploded instantly. It was too good to be true because even the strongest S rank only had dark gray, so she felt it was just a crystal ball malfunction since there was never ever a black color. Much later, People were at a gate, seeking team members and rejecting players who were thieves. Kangwoo presented his player card and was granted passage, so he made it through the gate and proceeded to look for monsters. Suddenly, someone appeared from behind him, asking if he was hunting alone and if he had gone through a second awakening. The guy was suddenly lit with excitement when he found out that Kangwoo had not gone through that second awakening, because that was a way to make him join his party. The guy was named Tisu, and he was taking that decision without consulting the rest of his party, who were not happy because there was no way an E-rank player would be of any help to them. However, the guy told him to show some consideration because it would not be nice to let someone like that die just like that, and he needed to save his life. They eventually agreed to accept him as long as he didn't get in their way, but Kangwoo thanked them and said he would hunt without a party. Tisu ignored his wish and went on to formally introduce himself now that they had gotten consent from the rest of the team members. Again, Kangwoo said he wasn't interested in joining a party, but this guy ignored him and told him to feel free to talk casually because even though he looked like a grandpa on his last lifeline, he was just in his 20s. This made Kong really shocked, and he wondered what on earth had happened to humans in the past 5 years. But he eventually maintained his stance that he didn't need to join a party because he had plans of his own. The big guy didn't want to force him, but instructed him to be careful because they were in the goblin habitat, and he should watch out for any goblin that was big in size because that was the strongest, and he was called a hobgoblin. This goblin was a boss monster that was on a whole other level compared to normal goblins, and it would be best for Kangwoo to avoid and run away from that one at all costs. Kangwoo couldn't help but appreciate how much of a nice guy Tisu was, and he knew he would have traveled with them if he really was an F-rank beginner. But knowing his type and his level of power, he knew he was better off venturing alone. Just then, he heard a sound and tracked it down, after which he identified that there were tons of goblins around, and later tracked them down to their location. The moment he happened on these goblins, Kangwoo wasted no time in using the blood for jam with his arm blades. He was glad to have secured a jackpot of even stronger goblins soon after the first set, and he moved like lightning, throwing them, sending their heads flying in the air, all at once, almost as if they were ambushing him at the same time. This went on for a couple of minutes more, and he only seemed to be getting stronger and unlocking deeper levels of his demonic strength. But there were too many of them left, and these guys in particular were trembling after seeing what had happened to their comrades. Their fears didn't stop Kangwoo from getting rid of all of them, and the entire village had become a bloodbath. He opened his stats window that showed that his experience points had increased and level had increased by 4, as well as his demonic energy stat, which increased by 1. He started searching for the magic stones, but after confirming that there was no demonic energy within them, but rather within their entire bodies, he started collecting those instead. The amount of demonic energy differed from goblin to goblin, depending on the time of death, meaning, if he consumed freshly dead monsters, he could earn demonic energy even more from their bodies. His demonic energy stat increased by 2 points instead, and all that was left of the corpses were bones and magic stones. Kangwoo was happy to have so many magic stones, because that meant he could buy more chicken and probably take Ciala out on a date. This motivated him to pick the magic stones even faster as he anticipated spoiling his girl with his bounty. But just then, he felt something and looked behind him to find the zaddy of all goblins, most likely the hobgoblin that Tisu had warned him about. This one wasn't playing like the other small fry that Kangwoo had just chopped down easily, and he could even sense an intense level of magic from this particular guy, meaning it knew how to use magic and was an opponent to watch out for. From their assessment, Kangwoo knew that his own destructive demonic power was stronger than the hobgoblin, but it didn't mean he would easily take this one down. The angry goblin roared loudly and landed his dagger in Kangwoo's direction. He crossed his arm blades together to form a barrier and hopped from one place to another to avoid the big guy's dagger. However, it eventually got to him, and his blades were struggling to sustain the weight of the goblin's blade, and this showed that the difference in their weights was a huge disadvantage to Kangwoo. He managed to block that attack and aimed at the goblin's shield, but it barely caused any damage and only cracked it a bit, while somehow destabilizing Kangwoo. He needed a wider gap between them and hopped from left to right as the goblin swung repeatedly without giving him a break in between, and this went on up until Kangwoo was directly in front of a tree. He just had to appreciate that the goblin's weight didn't hinder him from fighting well with his arms, and that the goblin was living up to his expectations as a boss of the other goblins. Eventually, the goblins slashed the tree Kangwoo was up against, and Kangwoo considered this as a destruction of the goblins' own territory, after seeing that all its subordinates were dead. In the end, this meant the goblin was still one of Kangwoo's prey, so he tossed a dead goblin's skull at it and made it even angrier than before. Kangwoo wasn't going to remain at that level of power either, and planned to explode his anger and gather overwhelming strength using the demon Crossel's power of rage. The plot twist was that it wouldn't be Kangwoo possessing this anger, but the goblin instead, and when he did, he chopped a bunch of trees without knowing what he had done, sending several of them flying in the air, as he was consumed by rage. Kangwoo's reason for this was that the rage skill amplified its target's power several times, but the price to pay was a curse that turned the target into an idiot who lacked rationality and attacked at random, making it easier for Kangwoo to dodge attacks and creating wider gaps between himself and his target. With this gap advantage, Kangwoo was able to injure the goblin's knee, but the beast only kept swinging endlessly and gave Kangwoo closer access to its crucial body parts. The last strike Kangwoo delivered was on the goblin's head, which he sliced into two and made it crumble to the ground in one heavy thud. Well, that was quite a fight, and the status window showed that he cleared a monster hideout by himself and would be receiving a 150% bonus experience points, especially after defeating a C-ranked boss monster. Additionally, he gained 3 levels and unlocked his second awakening after reaching the 11th level, meaning his second awakening special ability had been unlocked. This ability was Insatiable Hunger, which would make him absorb more demonic energy from defeated targets using gluttony. He immediately put this ability to use and noticed the smoke from the dead goblin's body was even darker than the previous ones, meaning this could be the effect of his new special ability. More demonic energy was absorbed as the system should, and his demonic energy stat increased by 3, making the total come to 19. Now, it was time to understand just how the increase in demonic energy affected his strength. The result turned out to be more than his expectation because instead of twice his previous strength, he had become 6 times stronger, and he couldn't even understand why it was increasing at such a sporadic rate. He feared that these unknown spikes in his power might be dangerous, and confirmed that it had already started weakening the seal on the myriad demon gates. He wondered why this was happening because there weren't any additional special changes, but it suddenly occurred to him that every time he unlocked an awakening, it would weaken the seal on the demon gate. And if this was the truth, it meant that as long as he increased his level, he would soon be able to regain his original powers, which meant for him exploring higher-ranked gates. He picked the magic stone and said his next goal was the 3rd awakening at level 20. Later that day at a restaurant, he took Ciala out for a lunch date and gobbled down his meal like he had been fasting for an eternity, because every bite and every sip was satisfactory and hitting all the right spots. Lily asked if it tasted better than her kimchi, but he told him that it would always taste better than anything in the world, and her kimchi was the only thing he could bury his face in, no matter how stinky it was. She found him to be hilarious and handed him her own piece of chicken, but she asked if she had any friends or family. He told her he had neither of them, and she asked where he usually slept, and he said he had no place to return to. The sweet girl then offered him to stay at her place, because he had helped her so much that she didn't know how to repay him. He saw the opportunity for unlimited rides, so he immediately accepted her offer and thanked her for it. To her greatest surprise, he gave her 3 million won and told her to think of it as a fee for letting him ride that cat, but she said she couldn't accept that amount of money. However, he reminded her that she wasn't in the best financial state, and if she simply thought of it as money for groceries, it would help her a lot. Her eyes were already filled with tears, and she thanked him from the depths of her heart, while promising to make better-tasting kimchi for him. Kangwoo was too excited at the idea of having Ciala's kimchi every day, and he imagined the look on her angelic face as he would be ravaging her kimchi. He planned to earn more money selling magic stones, and speaking of which, he asked if there were any D-rank gates nearby. She said there was one, but she hadn't gone there herself because she heard it was filled with lizard men. Kangwoo decided he would be going there the next day, so he could awaken faster and earn a lot more money, but most importantly, he wanted to know if lizard meat tasted great. That night, Ciala took Kangwoo to her older brother's room, and he thanked her because he would finally get to sleep comfortably. She turned off the light and left him with his thoughts, and he was so grateful for the soft feeling the mattress had beneath his body, along with the comfort and quiet he was enjoying. The next day, hustle was back as usual, and people were begging to join parties, especially one repeatedly rejected bandit, whom no one wanted to take in. Kangwoo was already feeling bad for him, and wishing someone would just take the guy already, but he ignored him because he wasn't his problem, and he was now certified as a D-rank player, so he stepped into the gate for yet another day of adventures. This time around, he was in a completely new gate, and wondered if he should be moving quietly or not, so he chose to use the power of silence as he remembered some of the things Ciala told him yesterday about the lizard men. Apparently, these species were sensitive to sound but had terrible eyesight, so it was best to approach them silently since they could all gang up on a person at once. As he moved in silence, he discovered 3 lizard men and applied yet another knowledge he learned from Ciala, who told him that they were weak to fire, and if he had a fire-type mage in his party, it would be quite effective for hunting lizard men. Thankfully, Kangwoo was the fire himself and didn't need any sort of fire mage, so all he needed to activate was the Devil Andros's power of hellfire, and instantly attacked 3 of the lizard men at once, in their torsos, before engulfing them in flames completely. The thing about his flames was that they could not be put out the way regular fires would be put out, because there were hellfire flames after all. They could only be forced away with demonic energy or magical power, but never would they ever be put out. And since the flames burned away the target's life force instead of their physical body, he could use the power of gluttony to extract power from the corpse. He extracted the demonic energy, and somehow remembered that the guild Ciala's older brother came from the same name as his hell flames, Andros, and wondered where he picked the name up from. While he was still handling the corpses, 3 more lizard men appeared from behind a tree, and just as he was about to handle them, some people called out to him and said he looked like a worthless beginner, judging from his cheap equipment, and they were inviting him to join their guild hunt. He asked what guild they belonged to, and they said they were the Andros Guild, so he didn't hesitate to tell them that he was uninterested. One of them called him an arrogant oaf who wasn't budging, and the lady asked him what they should do because they couldn't return empty-handed to the master. The guy decided that since Kangwoo had decided to play like that, he'd beat him up to death and brought him out because they were a worthless bunch and had been quite jobless for a while, and somehow felt they could teach anyone a lesson that they themselves hadn't learned. Meanwhile, Kangwoo was busy defeating more lizard men and extracting their life forces, up until he had almost completely consumed everything within that area. He felt it was better to risk it and focus on leveling up as fast as possible, and one who was wondering what to do, he heard the same voice from earlier, belonging to the rascal leading dumber rascals, and who was mocking him for hunting well. Kangwoo could already tell that this guy liked preying on weaklings, but he simply answered that he was worried for nothing, and as he could see, Kangwoo was hunting pretty well. However, the guy felt Kangwoo was being stupid because he could see Kangwoo's clothes looked too neat, with no corpses as evidence of him hunting at all. However, Kangwoo said he was resting, and the guy confronted him for his nasty attitude towards someone he should supposedly respect, but Kangwoo said his BS was getting out of hand. This annoyed the guy who called Kangwoo names, but Kangwoo asked him if he really wanted to go there. One of his minions was about to attack Kangwoo, but the leader told him not to worry because he was going to teach the uneducated idiot a lesson and make him regret messing around like that. But Kangwoo simply smirked and said he was looking forward to that, and the guy immediately clashed his sword against his shield, asking Kangwoo if he knew that lizard men were sensitive to sound. The guy didn't stop at that and kept doing his rubbish over and over again, and when he saw movement in the waters, he told his minions to prepare the magic barriers. He turned to Kang, asking if he had a good plan for his escape, because judging from the sound of the water, there were more than a dozen lizard men. He felt it would be overwhelming for a newbie like Kangwoo to attempt even one of them, so he asked him to get on his knees, and he would help him before they got to him. However, he maintained his cocky smile and asked if he was too scared that he couldn't talk, because he was wondering what the big plan was all along, and it was just underwhelming to see such a mediocre plan. He then spread his arms wide in the typical villainy evil laughter pose, telling his opponent to go all the way in attracting the lizard men. Thereafter, Kangwoo clapped his hands together, using the power of sound, and sent massive sound waves into the water while the fools watched in utter shock. He didn't stop this insanity, and they called him a psychopath, begging him to stop because the numbers were crazy and unlike anything they've ever seen in their lives before. To make matters worse for them, the lizard men were descending towards the barrier, and the leader had to force his mage to hold the barrier together for them, otherwise they would all die. Kangwoo gloated about knowing the lizard men's sensitivity to sound, so the gang leader insulted him and asked him why he was crazy, wanting everyone to die. However, Kangwoo said he had no intention of dying and was rather that they would die. He activated his power of silence, and the lizard man couldn't detect his presence, whereas they were already causing cracks in the barrier protecting those lunatics. In only a matter of seconds, the lizard man had successfully shattered the barrier and started feasting on them, and the stupid group leader, who wasn't fully aware of the situation, commanded his mage to create another barrier. The moment he turned, he found that one lizard man had pierced right through her with his organic sickle, and he was so horrified that he fell on his back and couldn't move. The good-for-nothing watched his team members getting gobbled up by Lizard Man, and he couldn't bring himself to do anything to rescue them because he was a coward. Now, the Lizard Man turned his attention to him while Kangwoo watched everything from above. The ringleader then asked him to save him, admitting his faults and begging Kangwoo to rescue him. It seemed his pleas were finally working, only for Kangwoo to mercilessly wish him good luck. Even as he was getting stabbed, the rascal insulted Kangwoo one last time before he was completely eaten up. Kangwoo was proud of himself because he fought evil with even more evil and a murderous intent with an even greater murderous intent. Much later, however, he set all the lizard men on fire and thereafter started draining any form of demonic power he could get from them. Later, he was told that he couldn't use the power of gluttony against those protected by the Gaia system, and it turns out he was trying to consume the special abilities of players, using the power of gluttony. It didn't matter now, though, because he could still amass so much demonic energy from the lizard men, and had amassed up to 30 points of demonic energy. This in turn increased the quality of his demonic energy, especially for the power of hellfire he had been using, so now he knew all he needed to do was level up and prepare for the third awakening, which wasn't far after he had haunted that much in a day. 3 days later, he had just finished a delicious meal from Ciala, and she asked if he was going to hunt again, so he said he was and would be back around dinner time. She said he had been pushing himself too hard and hadn't taken a break in the last few days, but he said it was all fine. Speaking about Ciala, he asked about her classes, and she said she would be done in a few days and would be going goblin hunting to level up. She wasn't sure how soon it would be, but she also wanted to reach the second awakening just like he did. She asked him to take one more cup of tea before leaving because he was probably tired from lacking rest, but suddenly something occurred to her. She asked if he had heard the recent news about the gate, which was that there had been cow players around. Even though these were just rumors, it could be true, and she was urging him to play safe at the gates. These cow players in question habitually faked their ranks and attacked other players, but suddenly this was looking like a rumor that went wrong because of what he did to those folks from the Andra's guild. He convinced himself that the last time he looked around, there were no witnesses, and the bodies certainly looked like they had been devoured by the lizard men. In any case, he had little to worry about if he was who everyone was referring to as a cow player, but he still had to prepare for the unknown and focus on leveling up as fast as he could. As he explored the gates that day, he leveled up to level 20 and unlocked the third awakening, which made his flames even more powerful and weakened the seal of the demon gate, causing more demonic energy to leak through the weakened seal. He encountered a magic stone and wondered if he should take a look at that too, but it strangely started melting in the mouth of the lizard man's carcass. This meant he could get as much demonic energy from a magic stone as he could get from a whole monster, and would be able to absorb demonic energy twice as fast with the magic stones. On the negative side, it meant he would have to give up on making cool cash by selling the magic stones, but since he had racked up a stack of cash in the past few days, he didn't have to go to the magic exchange anytime soon. Now that he had some free time on his hands, he wondered if he could play around a little more, and he instantly activated his power of the sky, which suspended him in the air to give him a perfect aerial view. He was curious about who the boss of the lizard men was, because he hadn't encountered any boss since he started exploring that gate and wanted to absorb a magic storm that belonged to a higher rank. Or just then, he heard a familiar voice belonging to none other than Tisu, who was bleeding from his mouth after getting beaten by a couple of younger guys. Kangwoo could tell that the situation was abnormal because he also saw the thief who had been searching for a party to join lying unconscious and bleeding from his head. Tisu asked the dudes why they would attack their own party members, but they told him to shut his stinky trap up, so he won't attract the lizard men's attention. It was at this moment that Kangwoo understood that these bad guys could be the rumored cow players, and that it wasn't him after all. Just then, the red-haired dude attacked Tisu, but the big guy blocked his attack with a shield, although he was barely holding himself together. He was so strong that the rascals just had to commend his level of strength, and even wondered if it was only the second awakening he had experienced to become so tough. Tisu was determined to the core that he wouldn't go down easily as they wished, and he fortified his shield with a special ability. However, the guys told him that, even though he had awakened a pretty high-rank ability, he still wouldn't win against them since he hadn't awakened his third special ability. They decided to put an end to everything, and the other guy reminded his friend that they couldn't take his life. Now Kangwoo wanted to understand what they were playing at because he just heard them say they couldn't end his life, and he suddenly wondered whether he should help him, because he couldn't resist remembering how kind Tisu was to him. They called him a muscle pig and told him to raise his shield, but this time, Kangwoo quickly stepped in because he detected demonic energy from the redhead guy's double axe. They asked him who on earth he was, and if he was just a passerby, because that meant he was one heck of an unlucky pass-by, seeing that he couldn't walk away unscathed with all the knowledge he had just gotten on the spot. Tisu recognized him, and the axe guy said he didn't have to spare Kangwoo's life since they had already fulfilled their quota of victims for capture. And since that was the case, it was about time they had some fun spilling innocent blood. Tisu cried out in horror, while the red-haired guy swung his axe like someone who had consumed cheap coke. However, Kangwoo slapped him before his arm could land, and his comrade watched him fall to the ground and asked if he was in his right senses. The redhead said something felt weird, but didn't allow him to know what felt weird when he started slapping that ugly face of his, which would earn him a Guinness World Record. His comrade drew his sword immediately to defend his friend, but Kangwoo activated the power of destruction and pushed his palm against the idiot's chest, pushing him at insane speed into a tree while disarming him at the same time. The first guy was still not completely conscious and kinda dragged his hair, asking him where he got demonic power from, but the ignoramus couldn't just shut his disgusting mouth up and still managed to insult Kangwoo, so he was forced to eat sand. Kangwoo reminded him who was boss and who would be asking the questions, so he decided to ask him one more time where he got access to demonic energy from. The poor guy said he couldn't expose this information, but Kangwoo told him he'd certainly want to tell him, so he activated the power of dread on the guy, making him pass through the same thing he did to Ciala's brother. The redhead became so terrified that he started mentioning that it was all the guild master's doing, but his comrade told him to shut up and asked if he was in his right mind. Kangwoo handled that one by sending some powerful magic waves towards him and making him pass out on his back. He turned his attention back to the first guy and asked what guild he belonged to, and yet again, Andra's guild was making the headlines. Apparently the guild master occasionally held a ritual and bestowed the demonic power upon them, so Kangwoo asked him to explain the ritual. The poor guy started crying and couldn't bring the words out of his mouth, so Kangwoo put him through more dread, and the guy just started stammering repeatedly until something suddenly took over his entire body and made his blood vessels so engorged that they later exploded and led to his death. Kangwoo was pretty shocked and figured that they must have planted a device into these guys that would get rid of the targets if they ever disclosed the ritual. Tisu recognized Kangwoo from earlier, while the bandit soon regained consciousness and learned he'd been saved too. It was odd to Tisu that he had seen Kangwoo at an E-rank gate, and the boy simply said he was only there for an errand. This made sense and explained why he turned down the offer to join them, and Tisu thanked him heartily, because they would have died if it weren't for his intervention. He was glad to have met him, and even learned that he was a high-level player, but he promised that he would repay the favor someday. That aside, he shared that the Andra's guild had a very terrible reputation, but he never believed that they would have cow players. He decided to report it to the Hwarang Corps, which was a player unit under the government management that was responsible for investigating such matters. However, Kangwoo told him not to report what happened just then because he was planning to take care of that guild by himself. Tisu had a lot of questions on his mind, but decided not to ask any, and Kangwoo told him to forget about what happened in the meantime. The guy was more than willing to comply with Kangwoo and Bode to show his loyalty and dedication to helping him punish the Andra's guild for the atrocities they committed. He thought Kangwoo was trying to be a hero and was motivated by justice, just like in the movies, but he thought he knew better and just let him yap on because the guy reminded him of his most loyal subordinate, Balak. The other guy bowed to Kangwoo for his help and said that, even though he was just a useless bandit who should shut up his mouth, he would return the favor someday. He explained that the stereotype around bandits didn't permit them to join any parties, and that was their unfortunate fate. Tisu said if he really wanted to repay Kangwoo, he should build a team on the spot. The guy's eyes were filled with tears, and he said he was grateful for the opportunity, but he had only been a burden and got his buns whooped while doing nothing in defense. He decided to become a lot stronger so he could assist both of them again someday, and then he headed out of the forest. Kangwoo was deeply pleased to have people indebted to him, although now he didn't know what to do with Tisu. He started by asking what his current level was, and learned that the guy was at level 12 and had just reached his second awakening, not too long ago. He asked about the basic education, and he said the first awakening special ability was with C rank, and he just leveled up by hunting, while the second awakening special ability was in a rank. Kangwoo was quite impressed, and realized that Tisu had a lot more potential than was obvious, so he asked him why he didn't join a guild, even though he would have been able to get into any of his choice. In response, Tisu said he was still considering which guild to join, and immediately said he no longer cared about joining any guild because he now had a real man like Kangwoo whom he'd be simping for. Although he didn't understand the guy's obsession, Kangwoo knew that since Tisu received the high rank for his second awakening, he had a higher likelihood of receiving better abilities during his third and fourth awakenings. Immediately, his mind shifted to Ciala, who was supposed to have her second awakening soon, so he agreed to take Tisu in, and the guy asked him for his number so he would provide his assistance, if there was any time it was needed. Already, Kangwoo had a favor to request, which was that Tisu should form a party with Ciala, who was a healer class. After their conversation, Kangwoo moved on to the unconscious guy who had recently regained consciousness, and said he was going to ask him some questions, which he would best not lie in replying. The guy said his name was Chelho, and Ken asked him about a statement he made earlier where he said to his partner to capture the players alive and bring them back. Dude claimed he didn't remember, so Kangwoo healed his dementia with a kick to the skull, and the guy said the reason behind capturing the players alive was to offer them as sacrifices. This was one heck of a bombshell, and revealed just how much of lunatics made up the Andra's guild, but he recalled that Taehyung said the exact thing. Kangwoo then activated the power of dread and told the guy that he was going to carry out a favor for him. Later, Chialho returned to his superior with a box in his hands, and the guy asked him what took him so long to return with a sacrifice, and where his teammate was. He told him that his partner was dead, and that he could grab the sacrifice in the box already, but the other guy didn't believe that he was a strong partner would die in a D-rank dungeon. Chialho insisted that that was what happened, because unfortunately there was a high-level player among them, and thanks to his partner, he barely managed to defeat the player and successfully brought him as a sacrifice. The dude opened the box and saw Kangwoo looking like a used doormat, but since he was breathing and his condition was fine, the sacrifice was good enough. However, the guy couldn't help but notice how weird Chialho was behaving, but Chialho said it was expected because his friend had died. His superior told him it was better to have fewer people anyway, and since he brought a sacrifice, they'd be able to get baptized, and it meant the demonic energy that was supposed to be for himself and his dear friend was now all for him. However, the same guy suggested that Chialho probably murdered his partner by himself to monopolize the demonic power, but Chialho told him to shut up and take care of the sacrifice. Immediately, he dusted off in a frenzy, leaving the other guy confused and wondering if that was how bad his partner's death got to him. Later on, he dragged the box into a large room looking like a shrine, and reported that they lost one of their players, but the sacrifice was nicely secured in the box. Since they were running out of time, they asked him to unzip it immediately, and they all started chanting something about the immortality of the great Andras. Their leader was wearing a mask and internally felt satisfied with himself because he had only converted for about a year, and his followers had steadily increased in numbers. Obviously, after testing the immense levels of power he could give them, they would always thirst for more, and he could always quench that thirst with demonic energy. He immediately said they should commence the ceremony and told them to prepare the magic stones. The desire for power of his followers was steadily growing, and making his body hurt and power become increasingly more demonic, and if this continued for a while, he would become a complete demon. He asked them who was due to be baptized that day, and the guy reported that it was originally Chialho, but that the guy refused to partake in the ceremony for that day. The leader said this meant that there would be no baptism that time around, and the followers started mumbling among themselves. He asked them to bring their sacrifice and magic stones if they desired to be baptized, because those who did not work did not deserve to be baptized. And without his teaching, they would never get a chance to be baptized. Now that the sacrifice had no owner, it would automatically belong to him, and so he commanded the ceremony to start. He began by raising his staff and splitting a magic stone into halves, from which demonic energy began to flow around him, the sacrifice, and his magical circle. The magic stones were many for him, and were essential for his ceremonies to be carried out, but as long as he had them in surplus, he would only keep getting stronger by accepting the demonic energy flowing through a certain crack in the floor. As the demonic energy seeped through the crack towards him, he was so excited that he wanted to absorb it immediately, but the energy was too dangerous for him to consume directly, and only death would follow if he had no medium to absorb it. And this was where his sacrifice came in, because the sacrifice would absorb the demonic energy until they were deaf, and he would drink the blood of the corpse, making the demonic energy he consumed a more refined version. As the demonic energy flowed through Kangwoo's body, the guild leader was pretty impressed that he had lasted so long and wondered if the guy was an A-rank, because the longer the sacrifice lasted, the more demonic energy could be obtained. At this point, Kangwoo wasn't just 5, 10, or 15 times better, but he was an incredible sacrifice, and the demonic energy he was absorbing was insane, meaning the leader would get even more. He urged his sacrifice to scream and wail in a pathetic manner, but he suddenly noticed that the sacrifice was absorbing way more than was expected, because the absorption had gone up to even 50 times the normal amount and wasn't stopping. When he saw how strange the whole thing had become, he immediately commanded them to stop the ritual, and after the whole thing ceased, he was still trembling and couldn't believe what had just happened. Kangwoo divinely arose and said the demonic energy boost allowed him to level up by 20 stats. The guild leader didn't understand what he was saying, and Kangwoo told him to run the ceremony just one more time. He made the guild leader tremble in disbelief and shock, and then he transitioned to anger and frustration, which made him attempt to light Kangwoo on fire. Kangwoo dodged the attack and let the explosion happen elsewhere, so the guy relentlessly created multiple fireballs to surround Kangwoo with and burn him down. There was a massive explosion, but Kangwoo was still intact and had protected himself with the power of the iron wall. At this point, the guy realized that Kangwoo was using demonic energy, commanded his minions to attack him immediately. The idiot couldn't even use the things they called brains, and went ahead to attack Kangwoo, but as the first guy approached him with a sword, he chopped off his hand, and then he got rid of any other person who stood in his way. They all called on the guild master, and he smiled stupidly and told Kangwoo to watch as greatness was about to unfold. He summoned what he deemed the most powerful flames that could incinerate all life forms, the power of hellfire. Kangwoo just ignored the lunatic, even as he kept bubbling about how he had no idea how Kangwoo could handle demonic energy, but he was pretty sure there was no way he could surpass his power. But to his greatest shock, his useless fireball was just like a matchstick's flame compared to Kangwoo's fire, which burned so widely that it occupied the entire ceiling in the hall. The guy found it impossible and knew that he certainly couldn't beat whatever it was that Kangwoo was holding. So the idiot immediately fell to his knees and started worshipping Kangwoo, calling him the great reincarnation of Andras, whom they had been awaiting for so long, because he was their god. He immediately commanded his disciples to stop watching like dead fish and bow to the one who would guide them out of their doomed destinies and lead them to eternal life. Kangwoo was getting irritated by his sycophancy, because the hideous creature claimed he'd known Kangwoo was the long-awaited king of demons. He claimed to be so overcome by his feelings for Kangwoo that he could explode in his pants. So Kangwoo appreciated that at least the fool wasn't a complete moron, and knew he was supposed to grovel on his knees before Kangwoo. He decided to play along by levitating in the air and flamboyantly standing in his full might, and then he claimed to be Andras, the king of hellfire and of all demons. The guild master bowed and paid homage to him, and then Kangwoo asked him to dismiss his subordinates so he could have a private conversation with him. When they were all gone, the guys revealed that his name was Diok, and Kangwoo said he was going to ask him a few questions. Again, Diok simped hard and hailed him as the great Andras, but Kangwoo told him to cut that BS because it's obvious he knew Kangwoo wasn't Andras. Diok knew he'd been caught, so he asked Kangwoo who he really was, but he was told to shut the heck up and explain how the ceremony was possible and how Deok learned to create a crack leading to hell with magic stones. Deok said he learned it after someone preached to him, particularly a guy in a demon mask who promised him eternal life if he joined the demonic religion. However, Kangwoo wondered why the pig accepted the opportunity without knowing what it truly was, and Deok explained that the guy was so strong that he overpowered their guild and told them to choose between following his orders and dying, leaving them no option but to keep following his orders. Kangwoo asked him who the monster behind the mask was, but Deok said he knew absolutely nothing about that person, because he'd never seen him ever since he took over their guild, and that he'd been sending his orders to them via mail. Kangwoo realized that these poor guys were initially forced into what they were doing, but when greed kicked in and they enjoyed the power from demons, it became easy for Deok to initiate his own ceremonies. The most important observation is that this demonic cult somehow had knowledge of how to get to hell, and he couldn't ignore this bit of information. He started by demanding the letters the masked guy sent, but it was only one, and that letter stated that Deok should accept the demonic religion and amass plenty of followers. Kangwoo asked Deok if he was the only one who was preached to, and the guy said he wasn't sure because he hadn't met anyone else. However, Kangwoo felt it wasn't possible that they were the only ones doing this, because no one would completely throw their faith into one person alone when the plan was to increase their forces. One thing was loud and clear, and Kangwoo wasn't going to have it, but which was that the morons behind this whole thing were trying to transform Earth into hell. He gave Deok 3 instructions, with the first being that he should investigate the demonic religion, the second being that he should stop performing any such ceremonies, and the third being that he should keep their conversation between both of them. The truth was, even though he could stop the activities from happening again, the Andras Guild alone had too much mess from their past and had been using players as sacrifices not once or twice, but on countless occasions. Also, since the government was involved in the whole thing, Kangwoo would be caught if he started investigating the actions of the demonic religion. He used the power of dread on Deok, so there wasn't going to be any information leak, but for now, he needed healing, and only Ciala's cream pie could heal him. She asked him if he was okay because she'd been trying to get in touch with him, but he said something came up. Anyway, she went to prepare dinner for him, and he requested his usual kimchi, so she promised to throw in some good meat. She also revealed great news, that she had received a second awakening and was now a B-class with the skill, Blessings of Light. Kangwoo was really glad because his party was already rich with these two, who had super impressive abilities. He asked her if she'd been approached by any guild, and she admitted that there were so many, although she didn't want to work with them and rather wanted to be with Kangwoo. Unfortunately, he had to disappoint her by saying her current strength, even though it was great and all, couldn't be of any use to him because he had leveled up beyond comprehension. He, however, offered her a position working with Tisu, who was an excellent tanker and one she could gain experience points working with, before they could eventually work with Kangwoo. Soon, the kimchi was ready, and Kangwoo was delighted that Ciala had upgraded it with ramyun toppings, so he was determined now more than ever to protect the Earth from those monsters who wanted to turn it into hell and disturb his unlimited kimchi sessions. How easy will it be for Kangwoo to locate a demon human with no name or face? Could it possibly be a government official? If you're eager to find out in part 2, comment Ciala's Steamy Kimchi. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for similar content. As always, thanks for watching.